When I was growing up, my mother would drag 9 of us to Mass every Sunday, the 8 children and my father. As we got older and a little sassier, I think all of us at one point or another asked my mother, why do we have to go to church? I don't get anything out of it. Why do I have to go? And I think that is a question that every parent gets asked at some point by their children as they get older. And my mother's answer was probably the same answer that every child received. Well, what are you bringing to it? And that's a good answer. But there's a better one. And I think it's a lesson that we should start teaching our children again, because I think we have forgotten to teach our children that everything is not going to be about you all the time. And the idea that I go to Mass simply that I can get something is not a complete understanding of what we're doing. Sometimes it will be about us, but more times than not, it's not. Sometimes it is about what we need, and sometimes it's about the person sitting next to us who just buried someone they love, who's in need of hope. Sometimes it is about us, and sometimes it is about the person sitting in the church who is a recovering addict, and they need strength. Sometimes it's about us, and sometimes it's about that married couple struggling to stay together and looking for love. Sometimes it's about us, and sometimes it's about that person who is in the church who is so lonely and can't seem to connect with another person. Sometimes it is about us and what we get, and sometimes it's about what we bring. Because when I bring my hope and surrender it to Jesus, Jesus does miraculous things with it. When I bring my joy and surrender it to Jesus, he does remarkable things. When I bring my love and my companionship and I surrender them to Jesus, Jesus works his miracles, and he magnifies and multiplies those gifts that I bring him so that everybody can be fed with what they truly need. Sometimes it's not all about us. We are just finishing up in Indianapolis a Eucharistic revival, which I was so glad for. We are in dire need of it. It is important for us to come to that deeper understanding of what we are doing when we celebrate this Eucharist. But I think that we resist the fullness of its meaning. Because if we really understood what we're doing in this Eucharist, it would change everything. There is an African understanding of community called Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. We are because I am. And it reflects that understanding of interrelatedness. That it's not just about me and my belonging to a community. It is about me being a part of something so much bigger than me and surrendering to something so much bigger than me. To really understand what we're doing at the Eucharist, we need the humility that St. Paul is urging the people in Ephesus. He says, I urge you to live a life worthy of the call you were given with all humility, gentleness, and patience. And then he says, so that you can retain that bond of peace, that bond of unity, that Ubuntu. But to get there, we need the humility to surrender. I don't know if you noticed, but we switched into the Gospel of John today. We had been in the Gospel of Mark, and now, and for the next 5 weeks, we're going to be in John's 6th chapter. 6th chapter of John is called the Bread of Life Discourse, and it's all about the Eucharist. You know, it's a little something about the genre of a gospel. A gospel is not a biography, nor is it a history. It is a theological treatise, and a gospel is written not to make believers of people. It's not apologetics. It is to deepen the faith of believers, people who have already come to believe. So no gospel was written to convince anybody about the divinity of Jesus. The Gospels were written to deepen the faith of people who had come to believe. John's was the last gospel written. Mark's was the first. And every subsequent gospel writer added another layer, another dimension to the reality of Jesus. This is one of very few stories of Jesus that appear in all 4 Gospels, very few. So it's important to look at it and really understand what John meant when he included it, because John makes a few changes. The first, all 4 Gospels connect the Eucharist to the Passover. The Passover, that seminal event in the life of the people of Israel where God liberated them, when God brought them into the desert and walked with them and fed them with manna from heaven. The Exodus, the Passover, where God showed his real power. Matthew, Mark, and Luke connected to the Passover at the Last Supper. When Jesus is celebrating the Passover meal, and he takes the bread and he says, "This is my body," and the wine, "This is my blood." Well, remember that at the Last Supper of the Gospel of John, we don't have that. We don't have that institutional narrative. In the Gospel of John, we get the foot washing. Because for John, the Eucharist is not all about me. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples and then told them, "As I have done for you, so you must do for others." That it's not just about you coming and getting your feet clean. It's not just about you coming and receiving what you need. It's about you going and providing for the needs of others. It's about you going with all humility and submission to the will of God and strengthening that bond of unity. John doesn't give us the institutional narrative at the Last Supper. What John gives us is a whole chapter dedicated to the bread of life. And it starts with the feeding of the 5,000. This, for John, is the Eucharist. For John, this is where people come, inspired by that great liberation of the Passover. And John makes it clear that the Jewish feast of the Passover was near. And so he connects it to that feast. So people are already in that mode of understanding. People are already in that mode of understanding the liberty that comes from the Passover. And then that little nameless boy who somehow managed to muster up the faith and the trust to surrender what little food he had in the face of this mass of people. You know, they counted only the men because that's what they did back then. The men would have been separated from the women and the children. The men counted 5,000. We don't know how many women and children there were, but there were certainly a whole lot more than 5,000 people. It was just 5,000 men. So this little boy with this little food somehow mustered up that understanding that if I can surrender to Jesus, I don't know what, I don't know how, but I know and I trust that Jesus will do something miraculous with this. And Jesus gave thanks. In Greek, Eucharista. Jesus gave Eucharist to God and then distributed. It is what we do here every Sunday. And it's not just about me. It's not just about me coming and getting what I need. And God knows that we all have our needs. God knows that we need more strength, more patience, more endurance. God knows what we need. But it's not all about that. And if I only come with the understanding of what I am going to get out of this, then this is a very utilitarian faith. We are nothing more than consumers in a church. If we really understood what we're doing and what this Eucharist calls us to, everything would change. No more could we look at people in that other political party as enemies. No longer could we look at people on our southern border as invaders. No more could we look at people who have hurt us as somehow evil or bad. No more could we look at other people if we really understood what we're celebrating in this Eucharist, that bond of unity, that communion. Everything would change. Yes. And so we need this Eucharistic revival. We need these next 5 weeks to dig deep into the core of our belief. And the core of our belief is that Jesus liberates us from our own needs so that we are able to see the needs of others and provide for it. Jesus liberates us from our need so that we can provide for the needs of others. And so at this Eucharist, come with the understanding of your own hunger. Come with the understanding of your own need. Come with a mouth and a heart open and ready to receive the feeding of Jesus. But come also with all that you have. Come also with your joy, with your peace, with your mercy. Come with all that you have so that Jesus can work the miracle of the Eucharist and feed others with what you bring. Sometimes it is about what we need, but it's never always all about us.
Amen.